I have never felt more alive. My name is Harvey Bodega, and welcome to Rollerdrome. There are some pieces of media that just make you feel like a badass, whether it's Aliens, Through the Fire and the Flames by Dragon Force, Doom, Mad Max Fury Road, and many others. They just get the adrenaline pumping, and
you just grew a third ball.
Rollerdrome absolutely makes this list. A quick background, Rollerdrome is a third-person sports action shooter developed of Roll 7 of Ali Ali and Laser League fame, published by Private Division, and released on August 16, 2022 for the PlayStations 4 and 5 and the PC. It takes place in a 70s-styled retro future where a totalitarian regime oversees a popular competition called Rollerdrome, a gladiatorial blood sport involving contestants doing roller skating tricks while shooting down enemies placed in the arena to kill them. You play as Kara Hassan, who has put herself in crippling debt just to enter the competition, with winning as the only way to pay it off. It's a basic premise, but a difficult challenge. Rollerdrome's gameplay requires balancing combat with stunts, and these mechanics are interestingly intertwined. Although messing up tricks doesn't really have any repercussions, there isn't fall damage, there is universal ammunition, and no reloading, ammo is regained by doing tricks, such as grabs, jumps, flips, grinds, wall riding, and several combinations, with better tricks generating more points and more ammo. Of course, the enemies, called house players, and they have a lot of different types, are trying to kill you. If you get damaged, you can only regain your health by killing those enemies. To do this, you start with dual pistols, but unlock a shotgun, a grenade launcher, and the chargeable sniper-like Z11 gun later in the game. Now, the pistols and shotgun, the guns you'll be using 90% of the time, have a lock-on system rather than aiming, so the balancing act of dodging, positioning, and tricks is often the main challenge. You do have a dodge roll, and it'll be your best friend, as well as a slow-motion bullet time ability. When all of these mechanics come together, you'll be flipping through the air in slow motion, capping enemies, and dodging attacks. These mechanics combine so well, but mastering the balance has an incredibly high skill ceiling. Thankfully, to start, there are hand-holdy tutorials that integrate well into the story, and I'd say they're necessary for a first-time playthrough. Although things start relatively tame, they get really difficult quickly. The way progression works is as you beat levels, new ones will unlock, with 11 in total. That may not sound like a lot, but you'll be replaying many of these levels several times. Of course, you'll replay them if you die, but also you'll need to in order to complete each level's challenges. The 11 levels are laid out like a tournament, with the final being the last level. And in order to qualify for the next tier of the competition, you have to complete a certain number of challenges. You'll need to circle back several times to complete these. Technically, to completely beat Rollerdrome, you have to beat every level in the standard campaign and Out for Blood, while also completing every challenge, although no more story is revealed after beating just the campaign. These challenges can be performing certain tricks, killing enemies in certain ways, collecting tokens, hitting a certain number of combos, finishing under a certain amount of time, accumulating a certain number of points, and many others. I've brought up points and combos a couple times now. Just to clarify, points are accumulated doing tricks, killing enemies, getting higher combos, finishing in a shorter amount of time, and several other components, and it earns you a grade at the end of the level. Higher combos accumulate higher points, and combos are increased by consistently shooting enemies and doing tricks while taking minimal damage. Alright, so those are the mechanics, and you can see that this game gets really chaotic, but remains an awesome thrill ride. It's worth mentioning that despite the chaos, Rollerdrome ran surprisingly well for me. I know that should be an expectation for new games, but I think it's worth a mention as so many releases buggy messes. One last note, I want to take a second to talk about controls, and this does come with an admission. I played Rollerdrome with keyboard and mouse, something the game itself advises against. This did make completing certain tricks much more difficult, but it's doable. That being said, if you are playing on PlayStation or have a controller to play the PC version with, that is the recommended way to play. Either way, the gameplay is baller and super fun.
You just grew a fourth ball.
Onto the visual presentation, which is done in an appealing cel-shaded technique. I really think this was the right call for this game, as not only does it look cool, but it also makes all the chaos much easier to understand. There are enemy attack animations, visual cues that warn of incoming damage, places to do tricks, and enemies all over the place. Comprehending all this information and prioritizing your next move is imperative, and it's a real achievement that I don't think there was a time I got confused. I love the art style. It's like a modern Jet Set Radio where you shoot people. What's not to like? Other than the sun looking a little silly and several of the levels feeling a bit samey, it's overall stylish and great. The audio presentation is also top tier. Although there isn't much of it, the voice acting and environmental sounds are solid. Music is awesome, with fun jams to raise the action even higher. I mean, I wouldn't go out of my way to listen to the music on its own, but it's great in the game's context. Where I think Rollerdrome's sound really excels, though, are the enemy and weapon sounds. Not only are they important for keeping track of incoming dangers or when your guns are about to run dry, but they're incredibly satisfying, and they up that badass score. So the presentation and gameplay mechanics are really well done, but there are a few problems that I wanted to point out. A more nitpicky one involves the auto-targeting. Although it's mostly incredibly reliable, targets close to each other could cause issues. Another one is the map design can also be a little confusing, and for me it wasn't intuitive on how to ascend to higher areas of the level. For example, right here I'm flying super high, but I went up a half pipe. That'll never get me forward to the platform in front of me, I'll have to find a different way up. These aren't big deals, and with enemy and player behavior being fair and consistent, it mostly impacts the steepness of the learning curve rather than being real issues. For less nitpicky examples, I have two main topics to discuss here. One is my main critique, and the other being a common complaint I saw online. I'll start with mine, and that has to do with the recycling of content. Now, for a relatively short game, there isn't a ton reused, but a lot of your time in the game will involve replaying each level a half dozen times or more. As I touched on briefly earlier, you have to initially beat the level, complete the challenges, and then beat the level again with new challenges on the Out for Blood difficulty. This is mostly fine because of how fun the gameplay is, and it naturally causing a lot of variety by just being so hectic, but many of the levels are also similar to one another. You've got mall, canyon, snow facility, and arena varieties, and that's about it. Each one does offer variations that can cause big gameplay changes, but it can start to feel pretty repetitive if you go for 100% completion. I will say none of this repetition felt cheap or unintended, except the two boss battles in the game. They're the same enemy, and it looks a lot like a Necron canoptic spider to me. This repetition felt like they had other plans, but went for a rinse and repeat method instead. The second encounter did add more attack varieties and more normal enemies into the mix, but felt a bit off. I will say that although variety is my main critique, it's easy for me to say, add much more. Each game has a development budget and release schedule, so it very well could be that we wouldn't have Rollerdrome at all with these different priorities, but it's just something I noticed. So that is my main note, but I came across another fairly rare but consistent complaint online. The difficulty.
Eliminated. Mission failed. Snake, are you okay? Snake.
Fatality.
I'll be clear, Rollerdrome has a steep learning curve with a high skill ceiling, and it can feel downright brutal at times. On the other hand, in 5 or so hours, you can go from a clumsy 4th grader on his mom's hand-me-down skates to a true skating badass. After beating the game, I found that I didn't agree with this critique. Not only did I think the difficulty made the game a lot more fun, feel more badass, and result in huge senses of achievement, but Rollerdrome even has some surprisingly merciful mechanics. For instance, both times you face the boss mentioned earlier, you have to complete a standard level first. On the first go-around, if you die, you have to start over the entire level. On the second time, you can restart after the level and just go straight into fighting the boss. Admittedly, I was a little disappointed. The rest of the game is very difficult, so that mercy almost felt out of place. Another example is when grinding to complete challenges to unlock the next levels in the tournament, you don't actually have to survive the levels, but just fulfill the criteria of the challenge, and they'll be credited to you whether or not you finish the level. So I'll say I get there being frustration with Rollerdrome's difficulty, but I'm going to file this as a positive rather than a negative. Alright, on to the story, and we'll jump straight into the spoiler warning. If you don't want any spoilers, jump to the time on screen now. Ready? Okay. In between several levels, there are these opportunities to wander around a limited first-person setting and learn more about the outside world. You learn that the government is tyrannical, anti-governmental protests are prevalent, the press is censored, and the Rollerdrome competition is anything but fair. Very much like Hunger Games, there is a constant drive to up the entertainment value by making things more difficult and more dangerous. There are attempts at fixing matches, attempts to intimidate contestants to withdraw, and at least one example of a contestant being murdered due to associating with anti-governmental groups. You learn all this, but it turns out to be set dressing. As Kara Hassan, you play through the game and win the competition. That's it. There is this moment at the very end where there's this ticking noise and I thought that Kara was about to be blown up for not withdrawing from the competition. But no, you raise the trophy and the game ends. Nothing more is revealed upon completing all the challenges or the Out for Blood New Game Plus mode either, besides a quick piece of story context for why Out for Blood even exists, which I did appreciate. I thought the lore building was super cool, but it ended up feeling anticlimactic. It was interesting enough that I wished there was more, but doesn't build to anything. On the plus side, there is a ton of lore to work with in the event of a sequel, but here the story is just a framework for the gameplay. Alright, spoiler avoiders have returned. Welcome back. Overall, I think Rollerdrome is a well done and unique game. Honestly, after beating it, my main takeaway was how much could be done with this framework. Imagine this with co-op or versus, or taking place outside of a small arena in somewhere less contained. There's a ton that can be built on with this world's lore, and I'd love to see what comes next. That being said, as a recommendation goes, I can absolutely recommend Rollerdrome. This is one of those genres that is not in my typical wheelhouses. Wheelhomes? Not in my typical wheelhouse, but I was surprised with how much fun I had with it. Honestly, upon completing a blisteringly difficult level, you feel like you can take on the world. As for Rollerdrome,
Get it, then get yourself a license plate that says 8-ball, cause you're gonna have 8 balls.
thank you so much for watching. My name is Harvey Bodega, and this is the last video of my Season 1. I'll be back next year with more, and feel free to message me on my Twitter, linked in the description, if you have any feedback, recommendations, or requests of games to cover. I will also link the video with all those growing ball jokes in the description as well. Thanks so much, everyone. This has been a blast. In movies and games, I always like watching the credits and calling out people who do the less hotshot jobs. Like I see you, Brian Roundy, Director of Marketing and Communications. Wait, no. No!
Joe Banks, 82 years young.